Why does a woman with hands that shake serve coffee in a room full of Navy SEALs? That's what they were thinking. That's what they saw. A trembling civilian in a restricted briefing room, scars running like rivers up her arm, eyes fixed on the floor, voice barely above a whisper. They had no idea. No idea that in exactly 20 minutes, everything they believed about strength, about warriors, about the woman standing before them would shatter like glass. The sound of ceramic hitting ceramic rang out sharp as gunfire. Ivy Sterling flinched. Her hands trembled as she set the coffee tray down on the polished oak table at the Navy SEAL compound in Virginia Beach. The scar running from her right wrist all the way up to her elbow showed stark and pale under the fluorescent lights. Visible. Undeniable. A mark she couldn't hide even if she wanted to. Good grief, look at that. Connor Reed pointed directly at her arm, 27 years old, fresh out of Bud S 3 months ago, still carrying that new guy swagger like armor. They let just anybody in here now. Laughter erupted. 3 men in navy blue shirts clustered around the tactical table, sharing the joke like it was something clever, something original. Ivy lowered her head. Her grip on the tray tightened until her knuckles went white. She stepped backward toward the door. 1 step, 2 steps. But Mason Blake, the demolitions expert with an arrogant smirk carved into his face, moved to block her path. Hold on a second. Mason crossed his arms, looking her up and down like she was equipment he was evaluating. Faulty equipment. How long have you worked here? A week? 2 weeks? 6 days, sir. Her voice came out barely above a whisper. 6 days. Ethan Hayes, the communications specialist, repeated the words with mockery dripping from every syllable. And they let you serve in the briefing room with hands that shake like that. Lieutenant Bradley Morrison rose from his chair, team leader, 5 years in the teams. His eyes swept over Ivy like he was assessing a target. You do know this is a restricted area, right? Only for personnel with proper clearance. Yes, sir. Ivy kept her gaze on the floor. I have my badge. A coffee service badge, Connor laughed, not a warrior badge. But in the corner of the room, Senior Chief Matthew Sullivan narrowed his eyes. 50 years old, 35 years of service under his belt. He'd seen things these young operators hadn't even imagined yet. And he noticed something they didn't. The way Ivy stood. The way she'd automatically identified every exit in the room the moment she entered. The way her eyes scanned the space, not like a frightened service worker, but like an operator assessing a threat environment. Something wasn't right here. Something didn't fit. Ivy set down the remaining cups with deliberate care, each movement slow and controlled. Connor watched her with barely concealed disgust, exchanging glances with Mason and Ethan. The three of them had formed a tight circle since graduating Bud S together, and they carried themselves with the swagger of men who believed they had earned the right to judge everyone around them. Make sure you clean up when you're done, Bradley said, his tone dismissive as he turned back to the tactical map spread across the table. We have actual work to do here. The words landed like a physical blow, but Ivy simply nodded. She picked up the empty tray and turned toward the door. As she moved, Connor deliberately shifted his weight. A stack of classified folders slid off the edge of the table, papers scattered across the floor in a wide arc. Oops, Connor's smile didn't reach his eyes. Better pick those up. Ivy hesitated, just a fraction of a second. Then she set down her tray. She crouched to gather the papers. Matthew Sullivan sat up straighter, because Ivy didn't just bend down. She moved into a perfect military squat, back straight, knees bent at the proper angle, weight distributed evenly. It was the kind of posture that took years of training to make automatic. The kind that became muscle memory only after thousands of repetitions under pressure. The papers in her hands were tactical maps, covered in markings and coordinates. As Ivy straightened, her eyes caught on one of them for just a moment too long. Do you even know what you're looking at? Bradley asked, his tone challenging. Ivy's jaw tightened, almost imperceptibly. Helmand Province, sir. The room went silent. 3 full seconds of absolute quiet. Bradley's eyebrows rose. Ethan leaned forward in his chair. "Lucky guess," Mason said, but there was a new edge to his voice. Something that hadn't been there before. Uncertainty, maybe, or the first whisper of doubt. Ivy handed the folders back to Connor without meeting his eyes. She returned to her tray. As she lifted it, Mason reached across the table for his water bottle and knocked it over. Ice-cold water splashed directly onto Ivy's hands and forearms. She jerked back reflexively. The tray tilted dangerously. For a split second, her body moved with the fluid precision of someone trained to react to threats. She pulled into a defensive stance. The tray dropped, but her hands shot out and caught it inches before it hit the ground. The reaction time was impossibly fast. Too fast for someone who was supposed to be just a civilian coffee service worker. Matthew Sullivan leaned back in his chair, his eyes never leaving Ivy. He'd seen that kind of reflexive response before, but only in one kind of person. Only in operators who'd been through hell and come out the other side with instincts that couldn't be turned off. He made a mental note, saying nothing, not yet. "Sorry about that," Mason said, though his tone suggested he wasn't sorry at all. "You should probably be more careful." Ivy straightened, water dripping from her hands. "Yes, sir." "Hey, quick question." Connor pushed back from the table with a scrape of chair legs against floor. "You know anything about weapons?" Ivy didn't respond. She focused instead on wiping the water off the tray with a cloth napkin. Ethan pointed at the M4 carbine mock-up mounted on the wall, part of the room's standard equipment displays. "Bet you don't even know what that is." Ivy's eyes flicked to the weapon. Less than a second. Her lips pressed together. For a moment it seemed like she wouldn't answer. Then, so quietly that the men had to strain to hear her, she said, "M4 carbine, sir. Effective range 500 meters." The room fell silent again, but this time the silence had weight to it. Pressure. Something heavy settling over all of them like a storm cloud. Bradley stared at Ivy with new intensity. Mason's smirk faded. Connor exchanged a confused glance with Ethan. "Lucky guess," Bradley finally said, but his voice lacked conviction. The door opened. Lieutenant Charlotte Warner entered, 30 years old, intelligence officer, sharp eyes that missed nothing. She took in the scene with a single sweep of her gaze, the scattered papers, the water on the table, Ivy standing with her head down, hands still dripping. The 4 seals arranged around her like wolves circling prey. Charlotte's expression remained neutral, but her eyes lingered on Ivy for a moment longer than necessary. Something about the woman's posture, about the way she held herself despite the obvious humiliation, struck Charlotte as odd. Familiar, almost. "Gentlemen," Charlotte said crisply, "Commander Cross needs those threat assessments by 1400 hours. "We're working on it," Bradley replied. He gestured dismissively at Ivy, "just dealing with a small distraction." Charlotte's gaze sharpened, but she said nothing. She moved to her desk in the corner and opened her laptop, seemingly focused on her work. But she was watching, always watching. Ivy moved toward the door again, but Mason stepped into her path. "You don't belong here," he said, his voice low and hard. "You understand that, right? This is a place for warriors, not for," he gestured vaguely at her trembling hands, at the scars on her arm, "not for whatever you are." He reached out as if to push her toward the door. Ivy sidestepped. It was a small movement, economical and precise, too precise. Mason's hand met empty air. He stumbled slightly, thrown off balance by the miss. The sidestep had been executed with the kind of spatial awareness that came from extensive combat training, the kind you didn't learn in a coffee service orientation. Matthew Sullivan's eyes narrowed further. He set down his coffee cup slowly, deliberately, his full attention now fixed on the interaction unfolding before him. The door opened again, and this time Captain Samuel Mitchell entered, 48 years old, base commander. His presence immediately changed the atmosphere in the room. Every seal straightened slightly, even if they didn't come to full attention. "What's going on here?" Captain Mitchell's voice wasn't loud, but it carried weight, authority earned over decades. "Nothing, sir," Bradley said quickly. "Just a minor disruption." Captain Mitchell's gaze swept the room, landed on Ivy, held there for a long moment. Something flickered across his face. Recognition, maybe, or calculation. "Sterling," he said quietly. Ivy looked up, met his eyes for the first time. "Sir." "My office, 5 minutes." The room went dead silent. Connor's mouth opened slightly. Mason's expression shifted from arrogance to confusion. Even Matthew Sullivan looked surprised. Captain Mitchell turned and walked out. The door closed behind him with a soft click. Ivy set down the tray, wiped her hands on her uniform, and followed him out without a word, without explanation, without looking back. The 4 seals stood frozen, staring at the closed door. "What the hell was that?" Ethan finally said. No one answered, because none of them knew. None of them understood what had just happened. They had mocked a coffee service worker, humiliated her, dismissed her, and the base commander had just called her by name. But there was something else they hadn't noticed, something Matthew Sullivan had seen but hadn't mentioned. When Captain Mitchell said her name, when he called her Sterling, Ivy's entire posture had changed. Just for a second. Her shoulders had squared, her chin had lifted, her eyes had sharpened. For one brief moment, she had looked exactly like what she was, a warrior. Have you ever wondered what it feels like to be invisible? Not the kind of invisible where people don't see you, but the kind where they see you and decide you don't matter. That's what Ivy had felt for 6 days. 6 days of serving coffee, of lowered eyes, of whispered yes, sirs, and trembling hands. 6 days of being exactly what they expected her to be. Weak, broken, forgettable. But Captain Mitchell hadn't forgotten. And in 5 minutes, the truth was about to come out whether she was ready or not. Ivy walked down the hallway. Her footsteps echoed against the polished floor. Around her, the compound buzzed with its usual activity. Operators in training gear moving between buildings. Administrative staff carrying folders and tablets. The constant hum of a military base in full operation. But Ivy felt separated from all of it, like she was walking through water, everything muffled and distant. Her hands had stopped shaking. That was the first thing she noticed. The tremor that had plagued her for weeks, the visible sign of her PTSD that everyone had mocked, had disappeared the moment Captain Mitchell said her name. Her body knew what was coming before her mind had fully processed it. The door to Mitchell's office was closed. Ivy stood outside it for 3 seconds, breathing, centering herself. Then she knocked. "Enter." She stepped inside. Captain Mitchell sat behind his desk, but he wasn't alone. Standing beside him was a woman Ivy hadn't seen in 3 years. Commander Diana Cross, 45 years old, sharp eyes, gray streaks in her dark hair. The woman who had recruited Ivy into DEVGRU. The woman who had signed her medical discharge papers. "Close the door, Sterling," Mitchell said quietly. Ivy closed it, stood at attention, old habits dying hard. At ease, Commander Cross stepped forward. "How are you, Ghost?" The call sign hit Ivy like a punch to the chest. Ghost. The name she'd carried for 4 years. The identity she'd left behind when she walked off that battlefield in Syria with shrapnel in her shoulder and PTSD in her soul. She hadn't heard anyone call her that in 6 months. "I'm managing, ma'am." "Managing," Cross repeated the word thoughtfully. "Is that what we're calling it? Working coffee service with a security clearance higher than most of the people in that briefing room." Ivy said nothing. What could she say? That she needed the job, that she needed routine, that serving coffee to SEALs who had no idea who she was felt like penance for all the things she'd done, all the things she couldn't undo. "Do you know why I approved your request to work here?" Mitchell asked. "No, sir." Because Commander Cross assured me you were the best sniper DEVGR you ever produced. Because your service record, the parts of it I'm cleared to read, is extraordinary. Because you earned a Navy Cross for Operation Silent Thunder. He paused. And because you deserved a quiet place to heal. Ivy's throat tightened. She kept her eyes forward, focusing on the wall behind Mitchell's desk. But I didn't approve it so you could be humiliated by operators who don't know their ass from their elbow, Mitchell continued. Those four in that briefing room, they're good, but they're young, cocky. They need to learn respect. With all due respect, sir, they don't need to know anything about me. Why not? Cross asked. Her voice was gentle but firm. Why hide who you are? Because Ghost is retired, ma'am, medically discharged. That part of my life is over. Is it? Cross moved closer. Because from where I'm standing, you're still carrying it, still letting it define you, still punishing yourself. The words cut deep. Ivy's hands clenched at her sides. You have PTSD, Cross continued. Anxiety, tremors, all of it documented in your medical file, all of it legitimate. But you're also one of the most capable operators this command has ever produced. Those two things can coexist, Ivy. Being wounded doesn't erase being a warrior. Ivy shook her head. I can't do what I used to do. The tremors, the panic attacks, I'm not fit for. I'm not asking you to go operational, Mitchell interrupted. But I am asking you to stop hiding. Those men out there need to understand something crucial about respect, about assumptions, about what strength actually looks like. You want me to tell them? I want you to show them, Cross said. Tomorrow morning, 600 hours, there's a training exercise, live fire drills, tactical scenarios. The whole compound will be watching. Evaluation for potential deployment assignments. Ivy felt her heart rate spike. Ma'am, I haven't held a rifle in 6 months. I haven't. I'm not asking you to compete, Cross said softly. I'm asking you to participate, to remind yourself who you are, not who you were, who you are right now today, scars and all. Silence filled the office. Outside, Ivy could hear muffled voices, footsteps in the hallway, the distant sound of helicopters on the training field, normal sounds, safe sounds. The sounds of a base where she was just Ivy Sterling, coffee service worker, invisible and forgettable. But that wasn't who she was, not really, not entirely. I don't know if I can, Ivy whispered. Yes, you do, Mitchell said firmly. You know exactly what you're capable of. You've just convinced yourself that being broken means being useless. It doesn't. Cross placed a hand on Ivy's shoulder. I watched you complete missions that would have destroyed lesser operators. I watched you make impossible shots under impossible conditions. I watched you save lives, eliminate threats, and do it all with precision that bordered on supernatural. And I also watched PTSD nearly destroy you after Syria. Both of those things are true. Both of those things are you. Ivy met Cross's eyes, saw understanding there, saw respect, saw something she hadn't seen in her own reflection for months, belief. The question isn't whether you can do this, Cross continued. The question is whether you're willing to stop punishing yourself long enough to remember what you're capable of. Ivy's hands trembled again, but this time it wasn't from fear, it was from something else, something she'd buried deep. Anger, maybe, or determination, or just exhaustion from carrying shame that didn't belong to her. If I do this, Ivy said slowly, if I participate tomorrow, what happens after? After you make a choice, Mitchell said. You can go back to coffee service. You can leave the compound entirely. Or you can accept the teaching position Commander Cross has been holding open for you for 3 months. Help train the next generation of operators. Teach them what you know. Show them what real strength looks like. A teaching position, not operations, not deployments, not putting herself back in situations that would trigger every trauma response she'd spent months learning to manage, but still using her skills, still contributing, still mattering. I need time to think, Ivy said. You have until 600 tomorrow, Cross replied. Show up or don't, it's your choice. But Sterling, Ghost, she waited until Ivy met her eyes. You've been invisible long enough. Those men out there, Connor, Mason, Ethan, Bradley, they mock something they don't understand. They saw weakness and assumed incompetence. Tomorrow is your chance to teach them the most important lesson they'll ever learn as SEALs. What lesson? That the most dangerous warriors are the ones who have been broken and rebuilt themselves. The ones who know pain and chose to keep going anyway. The ones who understand that strength isn't the absence of fear or trauma. It's the decision to stand up despite it. Ivy stood silent for a long moment. Her mind raced with possibilities, with fears, with memories of who she'd been and doubts about who she could become. The scars on her arm ached, a phantom pain that had nothing to do with the physical injury and everything to do with the weight of carrying her past into an uncertain future. Dismissed, Mitchell said quietly. Ivy saluted, turned, walked to the door, her hand on the handle. She paused. Ma'am, sir, what if I fail tomorrow? What if the tremors come back? What if I can't? Then you'll fail in front of people who need to see that failure doesn't define you, Cross said. And you'll get up and try again, just like you've been doing every single day since Syria. Ivy nodded, opened the door, stepped out into the hallway. She walked back toward the briefing room, but she didn't go inside. Instead, she went to the women's locker room, empty at this hour. She stood in front of the mirror and looked at herself. Really looked. The scars on her arm told a story. Syria, Operation Silent Thunder, the day everything changed. But they also told another story. Survival, endurance. The fact that she was still here, still breathing, still fighting even when the battle was against her own mind. Her hands trembled. She watched them shake in the mirror's reflection. PTSD, anxiety, trauma response. All the clinical terms that described what happened when your nervous system remembered danger long after the danger had passed. She hated the tremor, hated how visible it made her struggle, hated how it gave people like Connor and Mason ammunition to dismiss her. But it was also proof that she'd survived something that would have destroyed most people, proof that her body and mind were still fighting to protect her, even when the threat was long gone, proof that she was still here. Ivy pulled her phone from her pocket, opened her contacts, scrolled to a name she hadn't called in months, Dr. Sarah Chen, her therapist, the woman who'd helped her survive the darkest months after her discharge. She typed a message. Tomorrow I'm doing something that scares me. Can we schedule an emergency session for tomorrow afternoon? The response came within 2 minutes. Already on my calendar. You've got this, Ivy. Proud of you. Ivy closed her eyes, breathed, centered herself. Tomorrow at 600 hours, she would step onto that training field. She would pick up a rifle. She would remember what it felt like to be Ghost. And she would show 4 arrogant SEALs what they should have seen from the beginning. That the woman with the trembling hands and the scars on her arm wasn't weak. She was a warrior who'd survived hell and was still standing, still fighting, still here. But tonight she had to prepare, not just physically but mentally. She had to decide if she was ready to stop hiding, if she was ready to be seen, really seen, not as a coffee service worker or as Ghost the legendary sniper, but as Ivy Sterling, scarred, struggling, surviving, strong. What does it feel like to stand on the edge of everything you've been running from? Ivy knew. She'd woken up at 400 hours, 2 hours before the training exercise, her body already flooded with adrenaline she couldn't control. The tremors in her hands had started the moment she opened her eyes, but this time she didn't try to hide them. She just watched them shake, watched her fingers tremble against the bedsheets, and accepted them as part of who she was now. Broken pieces still trying to fit together. The question wasn't whether she would fail today. The question was whether failing in front of everyone would destroy her or finally set her free. She'd barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Syria, felt the weight of the rifle, heard the crack of the shot, saw target Alpha drop, then felt the explosion, shrapnel tearing through her shoulder, the blood, the screaming, the medevac chopper, the months of recovery, the medical discharge, the end of Ghost. But Ghost wasn't just a call sign. It was who she'd been. The best sniper DEVGRU had ever seen. A woman who could make impossible shots under impossible conditions, who could operate in hostile territory for weeks at a time, who never missed, who never failed, who never showed weakness. Until Syria broke her. Ivy stood in her small apartment, staring at the locked footlocker she hadn't opened since her discharge. Inside was her gear, the equipment she'd used on dozens of operations, the tools of a trade she'd mastered and then been forced to abandon. Her hands shook as she entered the combination. The lock clicked open. The smell hit her first. Weapon oil, dirt, the faint scent of foreign places and dangerous work. She lifted the lid slowly. There it was, her rifle, customized, modified, perfectly balanced for her specific build and shooting style. She'd fired tens of thousands of rounds through this weapon, knew its quirks and capabilities better than she knew her own handwriting. Ivy reached for it. Her fingers trembled as they closed around the stock. The weight was familiar, comforting, terrifying. She lifted it out of the case and brought it to her shoulder. Muscle memory took over. Her breathing steadied. Her stance adjusted automatically. For 3 seconds she was Ghost again. Then the panic attack hit. Her chest tightened. Her breathing became rapid and shallow. The rifle suddenly felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. She lowered it quickly, setting it on the bed as her hands shook violently. Sweat broke out on her forehead. Her vision tunneled. "Not now," she whispered. "Please, not now." She sat on the floor, counted her breaths. 4 in, hold for 4, 4 out, hold for 4. The technique Dr. Chen had taught her. Ground yourself. Find 5 things you can see. 5 things you can hear. Come back to the present. 5 things she could see. The rifle on the bed, her dresser, the window showing pre-dawn darkness, her boots by the door, her hands still trembling in her lap. 5 things she could hear. Traffic outside, the hum of the refrigerator, her own breathing, a distant siren, the ticking of the wall clock. Slowly the panic receded. Not gone, just manageable. Ivy stood on shaking legs. She looked at the rifle again. This time she didn't pick it up. She just looked at it, acknowledged it, accepted that it represented both her greatest strength and her deepest trauma. "You don't have to be perfect," she told herself. "You just have to show up." At 5:30 hours, Ivy arrived at the compound. She'd changed into training gear, her old combat pants and a plain black t-shirt. Not her uniform. She didn't have the right to wear that anymore, but close enough to feel like herself. The rifle case was slung over her shoulder. Her hands still trembled, but she'd stopped trying to hide it. The training field was already buzzing with activity. Operators setting up targets, range safety officers checking equipment, and standing near the main observation area were Connor, Mason, Ethan, and Bradley, the 4 men who'd mocked her just yesterday. They were laughing about something, casual and confident, ready to show off their skills. They hadn't seen her yet. Ivy could still turn around, walk away, go back to being invisible, safe, forgotten. But then she saw Matthew Sullivan. He stood off to the side, arms crossed, watching the preparations. And when his eyes landed on her, he nodded just once. A small gesture of acknowledgement, of respect. It was enough. Ivy walked forward, signed in with the range safety officer, found her assigned lane, set down her rifle case. Around her, other operators were prepping their weapons, checking equipment, talking strategy. She did the same, her movements slow and deliberate. Her hands shook as she assembled her rifle, but she didn't rush, didn't try to hide, just worked through the tremors like they were weather she had to endure. "Is that Sterling?" The voice came from her left. Ethan, he'd noticed her. Within seconds, Connor and Mason had turned to look, then Bradley. "What the hell is she doing here?" Connor said, loud enough for others to hear. Ivy didn't respond. She finished assembling her rifle, checked the scope, ran through her pre-fire checklist, all muscle memory, all automatic, even with trembling hands. Lieutenant Charlotte Warner appeared beside her. "You showed up." "Yes, ma'am." "Good." Charlotte lowered her voice. "Don't let them get in your head. You know who you are, show them." Before Ivy could respond, Captain Mitchell's voice boomed across the training field. "Listen up. Today's exercise is a comprehensive evaluation. We've got multiple scenarios set up: long-range precision, close quarters engagement, tactical movement under fire. This isn't a competition. This is an assessment of skills, decision-making, and performance under pressure." He paused, his eyes scanning the assembled operators. "We have a special participant today. Ivy Sterling will be joining us. Some of you may not be familiar with her background. That's intentional. Watch and learn." Ivy felt every eye turn toward her. The weight of attention was crushing. Her breathing quickened. Her hands shook harder, but she stood straight, didn't lower her head, didn't apologize for taking up space. Connor leaned toward Mason and whispered something. Both men smirked. They thought this was a joke, thought she was about to embarrass herself, prove them right. Maybe they were right. Maybe she would fail. Maybe the tremors would be too much. Maybe the PTSD would overwhelm her. Maybe Ghost was truly gone and all that remained was Ivy Sterling, broken and struggling and not nearly enough. But she was here. That had to count for something. "First scenario," Mitchell announced. "Long-range precision. Targets at 600, 800, and 1,000 meters. Wind speed varying. You'll have 3 shots per target. Make them count." The operators moved to their assigned positions. Ivy took her lane, set up her rifle, adjusted for wind and distance. Her hands trembled as she loaded the magazine. Around her, other shooters were settling into position, their movements confident and smooth. She felt clumsy by comparison, rusty, unreliable. "On my mark," the range safety officer called. 3, 2, 1, commence firing." Ivy pressed her eye to the scope. The 600-meter target came into focus. She regulated her breathing, felt for the wind, made micro-adjustments. Her hands shook. The crosshairs danced across the target. She couldn't hold them steady. Her finger found the trigger, squeezed. The rifle cracked, the recoil familiar against her shoulder. Through the scope she saw the impact. Center mass, not perfect but solid. She chambered another round, moved to the 800-meter target, adjusted for the increased distance. Her tremors seemed worse now. The crosshairs wouldn't stay still. She took a breath, held it, squeezed. Another crack, another hit, still center mass. The 1,000-meter target was the challenge. At that range, even the smallest tremor could throw the shot off by feet. She made her adjustments, factored wind speed, elevation, temperature, all the variables she'd calculated thousands of times before, but her hands wouldn't cooperate. The shake was too pronounced. She couldn't get a stable sight picture. Ivy lowered the rifle, took 3 breaths, reminded herself why she was here, not to be perfect, not to prove she was still Ghost, just to show up, to try, to acknowledge that being broken didn't mean being useless. She brought the rifle back up, accepted the tremor, worked with it instead of against it, found the rhythm of her shake, timed her breathing to match, squeezed the trigger between heartbeats, between tremors in that tiny window where everything aligned. The shot cracked out. Through the scope she watched the bullet impact, not center mass this time, low and right, but still a hit, still on target. Around her, other operators were finishing their strings. Some had perfect scores, some had missed. It was the natural variation of skilled shooters performing under observation. But when the results were tallied, Ivy's name appeared in the middle of the pack. Not the best, not the worst, competent, capable, present. Connor stared at the scoreboard with confusion. Mason frowned. Ethan looked like he'd seen something he couldn't quite process. Bradley just stood silent, his expression unreadable. "Second scenario," Mitchell announced. "Close quarters engagement, timed, multiple targets, simulated hostage situation. Precision matters more than speed." This was worse for Ivy. Close quarters required rapid target acquisition, quick transitions, steady hands for accurate rapid fire, all the things her tremors made nearly impossible. She moved to the designated course. Around her, operators checked their weapons and psyched themselves up. She just stood quiet, managing her breathing, fighting the rising panic in her chest. The buzzer sounded. Ivy moved through the course. Her hands shook so badly she almost dropped the rifle twice. Her first target engagement was sloppy, too slow, too hesitant, but she adjusted, remembered her training, trusted her instincts even when her body wouldn't cooperate. By the third target, she'd found a rhythm, not smooth, not elegant, but effective. She finished the course, not the fastest time, not even close, but she'd hit every hostile target and avoided every hostage simulation. Mission complete, even if the execution was rough. As she cleared her weapon and stepped off the course, she heard Matthew Sullivan's voice. Not bad for someone who hasn't trained in 6 months. She turned. He stood a few feet away, his weathered face unreadable. "You're fighting your hands." "Yes, Senior Chief." "Stop fighting, accept, adapt, overcome." He paused. "Your technique is sound, your instincts are sharp, the tremors are just noise. You're letting them distract you from what you still know how to do." "It's not that simple." "Never said it was simple, said it was possible." He nodded toward the next scenario. "You've got one more, make it count." The final scenario was the hardest. Tactical movement under fire. Navigate an obstacle course while engaging targets. Stress, pressure. The kind of situation that would amplify every symptom of PTSD. Ivy felt her chest tighten just looking at it, but she'd come this far. Backing out now would mean all of this had been for nothing. She moved to the starting line. Around her, operators were joking, psyching each other up, treating this like a game. For them, it was training. For Ivy, it was something else entirely. Proof, redemption, or maybe just one more chance to remember who she used to be before Syria broke her. The buzzer sounded. Ivy ran forward, and everything she'd been afraid of started to happen. The gunfire sounds triggered flashbacks. The smoke obscured her vision and she was back in Syria. The adrenaline flood made her hands shake worse. But she kept moving, kept engaging targets, kept pushing through even as her body screamed at her to stop, to hide, to protect herself from danger that wasn't actually there. Halfway through, she stumbled, nearly fell. Her breathing was ragged, her vision tunneled. She was having a panic attack in the middle of the course. Everyone could see it. Everyone would know she was broken, weak, not fit for this. But then she heard a voice, quiet but clear. "Get up, Sterling." Charlotte Warner stood at the edge of the course, her expression calm but firm. "You're not in Syria, you're here, right now. Get up and finish." Ivy got up, finished the course. Her time was terrible. Her target engagement was sloppy. She'd failed by every measurable standard, but she'd finished. She'd gotten back up and finished. And somehow that felt like more of an accomplishment than any perfect score ever had. What happens when you expose everything you've been hiding? When you stand in front of people who mocked you and show them exactly how broken you really are? Ivy stood at the edge of the training field, hands still trembling, chest heaving from exertion and panic, knowing that every operator on that compound had just watched her struggle, had just seen her stumble, freeze, fight through a panic attack in real time. She'd proven nothing except that she was exactly what they thought: damaged, unreliable, weak. Or had she? Because Matthew Sullivan was walking toward her now, his weathered face carrying an expression she hadn't seen before. And behind him, the 4 SEALs who'd mocked her yesterday were silent, their swagger suddenly absent, watching her like they'd just witnessed something they didn't quite understand. Ivy's hands wouldn't stop shaking. She stood near the equipment area trying to disassemble her rifle, but her fingers kept fumbling with the components. Sweat dripped from her forehead. Her breathing still hadn't fully stabilized. The panic attack had passed, but its aftershocks lingered, making everything feel fragile and uncertain. "Let me help with that." Charlotte Warner appeared beside her, gently taking the rifle. She began the disassembly process with practiced efficiency while Ivy just stood there, feeling useless. "I failed," Ivy said quietly. "Did you?" "My time was terrible. I had a panic attack in the middle of the course. Everyone saw." "Everyone saw you get back up," Charlotte interrupted. "They saw you finish. Do you know how many operators I've watched quit when things got hard, when the pressure overwhelmed them, when they realized they weren't invincible?" She looked at Ivy directly. "You didn't quit. That's not failure. It's not success either. No, it's something more important. It's courage." Before Ivy could respond, Matthew Sullivan reached them. He dismissed Charlotte with a nod and turned his full attention to Ivy. "Walk with me." It wasn't a request. Ivy followed him away from the training field, toward a quieter area near the administrative buildings. They walked in silence for nearly a minute before Sullivan spoke. "35 years I've been doing this," he said. "Trained hundreds of operators, seen the best of the best, seen legends in the making. And you know what I've learned?" He stopped walking, turned to face her. "The most dangerous operators aren't the ones who have never been broken. They're the ones who have been shattered and rebuilt themselves, because they know something the others don't." "What's that, Senior Chief?" "That failure isn't fatal. That pain is survivable, that you can lose everything and still find a way to keep fighting." He paused. "You were Ghost, DVGRU's best sniper. I've read parts of your file, seen your record. What you accomplished was extraordinary, but what you did today, that was more impressive." Ivy shook her head. "I barely made it through. I had a panic attack. "You showed up," Sullivan interrupted. 6 months after a medical discharge, with PTSD that would have kept most people in bed, with tremors that make even basic tasks difficult. You showed up, picked up a rifle, and performed. Not perfectly, but adequately. And more importantly, you finished. That takes a kind of strength those young hotshots don't understand yet." He gestured back toward the training field. "Connor, Mason, Ethan, Bradley, good operators, skilled, confident, but they've never been tested, not really. They think strength is about never showing weakness, about being unbreakable. They're wrong." "What is it about then?" "Knowing you're breakable and showing up anyway." The words hit Ivy harder than she expected. She felt her throat tighten, tears threatening to surface. She blinked them back, refusing to cry in front of a senior chief. "They need to understand something," Sullivan continued, "and you're going to teach them." "I don't understand." "Captain Mitchell has approved a new training module, Resilience and Recovery. You're going to lead it." Ivy's eyes widened. "Senior Chief, I'm not qualified to." "You're the most qualified person on this base," he said firmly. "You've been through hell. You've survived. You're learning to function again. That's what they need to see, not perfection, not invincibility, real strength. The kind that keeps going even when everything hurts." "I can't." "Yes, you can, and you will. Because those 4 operators who mocked you yesterday, they're about to get a reality check, and you're going to deliver it." Before Ivy could protest further, Mitchell's voice called across the compound. "Briefing room. All personnel from this morning's exercise, now." Ivy followed Sullivan back to the briefing room, the same room where she'd been humiliated just 24 hours ago. This time when she entered, the atmosphere was different. Operators who'd participated in the morning exercise filled the space. Connor, Mason, Ethan, and Bradley sat in the front row, their expressions guarded. They knew something was coming. They just didn't know what. Captain Mitchell stood at the front of the room, Commander Cross beside him. When everyone was seated, Mitchell began. "This morning's exercise was not what it appeared to be. Yes, we evaluated tactical skills, but more importantly, we evaluated something else: character, resilience, and the ability to recognize strength when it doesn't look the way you expect." He gestured to Ivy, who stood near the back. "Ivy Sterling, coffee service worker, or so you thought. Let me introduce you to someone." Mitchell pulled up a screen. Classified information appeared: operational records, mission briefs, commendations. And at the center of it all, a photo. Ivy in full combat gear, rifle in hand, call sign visible on her vest, Ghost. The room erupted in whispers. Connor's mouth fell open. Mason sat back in his chair like he'd been punched. Ethan stared at the screen in disbelief. Bradley's face went pale. Petty Officer First Class Ivy Sterling, Mitchell continued. DEVGRU, Naval Special Warfare Development Group, served 4 years, 37 successful operations, 2 Bronze Stars, 1 Silver Star, and a Navy Cross for Operation Silent Thunder, where she eliminated a high-value target responsible for the deaths of over 400 civilians and 30 coalition soldiers. Images flashed on the screen, mission reports, target assessments, Ivy's record of service, each image more impressive than the last. She was the best sniper this command ever produced, Cross added. Ghost could make shots other operators couldn't even attempt, could operate alone in hostile territory for weeks, could make the impossible look routine. Until Syria, until shrapnel tore through her shoulder and PTSD tore through her mind, until the Navy medically retired her 6 months ago. The room was silent now, every eye fixed on either the screen or Ivy herself. This morning you watched her struggle, Mitchell said. You saw her hands shake, you saw her have a panic attack, you saw her fail to meet the standards you all take for granted, and some of you probably thought it confirmed what you believed yesterday, that she was weak, that she didn't belong here. He paused. You were wrong. Mitchell turned to Connor directly. You mocked her scars, questioned her clearance, made her feel small. Do you know how she got those scars? Connor shook his head, his face burning with shame. IED shrapnel, Syria, Operation Silent Thunder. She took the hit protecting her extraction team, stayed on target despite the injury, made the kill shot while bleeding, saved 3 lives that day, and those are the scars you mocked. He turned to Mason. You told her she didn't belong in a warrior's space. You know what her call sign means. Ghost. Because she could move through enemy territory without being detected. Because she could eliminate targets and be gone before anyone knew she was there. Because she was the last thing her enemies saw before they died. And you told her she didn't belong. To Ethan, you questioned her knowledge of weapons. She's forgotten more about firearms than you'll learn in 10 years. Every weapon in this compound. She's qualified on it. Expert marksman across every platform. And you questioned if she knew what an M4 was. To Bradley, you dismissed her, treated her like a distraction. She has more combat experience than your entire fire team combined. More confirmed kills than most snipers achieve in a career. And you treated her like she was wasting your time. The 4 men sat frozen. Shame, embarrassment, something deeper than simple regret visible on their faces. But here's what you need to understand, Cross said, her voice cutting through the tension. Ivy Sterling is more than her record, more than her awards, more than Ghost. She's a human being who went to war, did extraordinary things, and paid an extraordinary price. She has PTSD, she has anxiety, she has tremors that make basic tasks difficult. And she showed up this morning anyway. She picked up a rifle, she performed. And when she had a panic attack halfway through the final scenario, she got up and finished. Cross moved to stand beside Ivy. That's real strength, not the absence of fear or trauma or difficulty. The decision to keep going despite it, to show up even when showing up means everyone will see how much you're struggling, to finish even when finishing means acknowledging you're not who you used to be. Ivy felt tears forming. She blinked them back, maintaining her composure through sheer force of will. Starting Monday, Mitchell announced, Ivy Sterling will be leading a new training module: resilience and recovery, combat stress, PTSD awareness, how to recognize when you or your teammates are struggling, how to support each other, how to understand that mental injuries are just as real as physical ones, and how to recognize that warriors come in all forms, including ones with trembling hands and scars they can't hide. He looked directly at Connor, Mason, Ethan, and Bradley. You 4 will be her first students. You'll meet with her 3 times a week. You'll learn what she has to teach, and you'll treat her with the respect she earned long before she ever served you coffee." The 4 men nodded, unable to meet Ivy's eyes. "This isn't punishment," Cross added. "This is education. You made assumptions. You acted on those assumptions. You hurt someone who deserved better. Now you're going to learn why those assumptions were wrong. And more importantly, you're going to learn to be better operators. Because someday one of you might be in Ivy's position, injured, struggling, trying to rebuild. And you'll need people around you who understand that being wounded doesn't mean you're worthless." Mitchell dismissed the room. Operators filed out quietly, the usual chatter absent. Connor, Mason, Ethan, and Bradley remained seated, clearly waiting to speak to Ivy. She wanted to leave, wanted to avoid the confrontation, but Charlotte placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "They need to do this. Let them." Connor stood first, walked toward Ivy with his head down. "Ma'am, I don't know what to say. I was completely out of line. I mocked you. I humiliated you. I had no idea." "You didn't need to know who I was," Ivy interrupted quietly. "You just needed to treat me with basic human decency. That should have been enough." Connor flinched. "You're right, I'm sorry, truly." Mason stepped forward next. "I told you that you didn't belong. I was wrong. You belong here more than I do. I'm sorry." Ethan followed. "I questioned your knowledge, made you feel small. That was inexcusable. I'm sorry." Bradley was last. He looked at Ivy with something that might have been respect mixed with shame. "I dismissed you, treated you like you were nothing. I was wrong. I'm sorry, and thank you for showing up this morning, for showing us what real courage looks like." Ivy stood silent for a moment. Part of her wanted to accept their apologies, to move forward, to let it go. But another part, the part that had been humiliated and dismissed and made to feel worthless, wasn't ready to let them off that easily. "Your apologies are noted," she said quietly. "But understand something. I don't need you to know my service record to deserve respect. The woman who served you coffee yesterday deserved dignity even if she'd never worn a uniform, even if she'd never fired a shot, even if she was exactly what you thought she was. The problem wasn't that you didn't know who I was. The problem was how you treated someone you perceived as weak." The words hung in the air, heavy, true, undeniable. "You'll learn," Ivy continued. "Starting Monday, you'll learn about PTSD, about combat stress, about what it's like to survive war and then have to survive the aftermath. You'll learn that strength comes in forms you don't recognize, and hopefully you'll learn to be better men, better operators, better teammates." She turned to leave, then paused. "One more thing. I forgive you, not because you deserve it, but because carrying anger takes energy I don't have. I've got enough battles to fight without adding you 4 to the list." With that, Ivy walked out of the briefing room. Her hands were still trembling. Her chest was still tight, but her head was held high. Because for the first time in 6 months she felt like herself again. Not Ghost, not just Ivy, both, scarred and strong, wounded and capable, broken and beautiful in her brokenness, whole in her incompleteness. Have you ever wondered if redemption is possible after you've given up on yourself? Ivy had wondered that every day for 6 months. Every morning she woke up with trembling hands. Every night she went to bed haunted by memories of Syria. Every moment in between, she'd questioned whether Ghost was truly gone or just hiding somewhere deep inside, waiting for permission to surface again. Now, standing in the briefing room on Monday morning, about to teach 4 SEALs who'd mocked her the hardest lesson they'd ever learn, she realized the answer wasn't simple. Redemption wasn't something that happened to you. It was something you built, piece by broken piece, until you'd constructed a new version of yourself that could carry both who you'd been and who you'd become. But first, she had to stop running from the parts of herself that hurt the most. The briefing room was different this time. No tactical maps on the tables, no weapons displays, just chairs arranged in a circle, a whiteboard, and Ivy standing at the front, her hands trembling as she held a marker. Connor, Mason, Ethan, and Bradley sat in those chairs, their usual swagger replaced with something that looked like nervous anticipation. They didn't know what to expect. Neither did Ivy. "Welcome to Resilience and Recovery," Ivy began, her voice quieter than she'd intended. She cleared her throat, tried again. "This isn't a typical training module. There are no marksmanship drills, no tactical scenarios, no physical tests. This is about something harder, understanding what happens when the mission ends but the war doesn't." She wrote 3 words on the whiteboard: trauma, recovery, strength. "You've all been trained to handle external threats," Ivy continued. "Enemy combatants, hostile environments, physical danger, but you haven't been trained to handle the internal threat. The one that comes after, the one that lives in your own mind. PTSD, combat stress, moral injury, the wounds that don't bleed but can kill you just as surely as any bullet." Mason shifted in his chair, uncomfortable. Ethan stared at the floor. Connor and Bradley watched Ivy with careful attention, as if they were afraid any wrong move would break something fragile. "I'm going to share something with you," Ivy said. "Something I haven't talked about outside of therapy. Because if I'm asking you to understand trauma, you need to see what it actually looks like." She set down the marker, rolled up her sleeve to expose the scars on her arm fully, not hiding them, not apologizing for them, just showing them. August 12, 2023. Operation Silent Thunder, Syria. I was positioned on a rooftop overlooking a compound. Target Alpha was inside. High-value target, responsible for hundreds of deaths. My mission was simple: confirm target, take the shot. Extract. Ivy's hands trembled as she spoke. She didn't try to hide it. "I confirmed the target, made the shot. 900 meters, wind speed varying, moving target through a window. I made that shot, target eliminated, mission complete. And then everything went wrong." She paused, managing her breathing. "IED, remotely detonated, the building I was on collapsed. I fell 3 stories, shrapnel tore through my shoulder, my arm, pinned me under rubble. I couldn't move, couldn't extract. The extraction team had to come in under fire to get me out. They risked their lives because I was trapped." The room was silent. You could hear the HVAC system humming, nothing else. "I survived," Ivy continued. "But something broke that day, not just my body, my mind. I started having panic attacks, nightmares. I couldn't be in enclosed spaces without feeling like I was trapped under that rubble again. Loud noises made me drop to the ground. My hands started shaking and never stopped. I went from being Ghost, the operator who never missed, to someone who could barely hold a coffee cup without spilling it." She met Connor's eyes. "That's what you mocked, not weakness, not incompetence, trauma. The aftermath of doing exactly what my country asked me to do and paying the price for it." Connor looked away, shame visible on his face. "But here's what you need to understand," Ivy said, her voice gaining strength. "PTSD doesn't mean I'm broken beyond repair. It means my nervous system is stuck in a threat response. It means my brain is still trying to protect me from danger that's already passed. It means I survived something traumatic and my body and mind are still processing that survival. It's not weakness. It's injury. And like any injury, it requires treatment, time, and patience to heal." She turned to the whiteboard. "Over the next several weeks, we're going to cover the realities of combat stress, what it looks like, how to recognize it in yourself and your teammates, how to support someone who's struggling, and most importantly, how to understand that mental injuries are just as real and just as serious as physical ones." Bradley raised his hand hesitantly. "Ma'am, why are you doing this? Teaching us, I mean. After what we did to you, you could have just, I don't know, let us figure it out on our own." Ivy smiled, a sad sort of smile. "Because you're going to war, maybe not today, maybe not this year, but eventually. And when you come back, if you come back, you might be carrying wounds no one can see. And if that happens, I want you to know that those wounds don't make you weak. They don't disqualify you from being a warrior. They just mean you need help. And there's no shame in that." Mason spoke up. "How do you deal with it? The PTSD, the panic attacks, He gestured vaguely at her trembling hands. Therapy, Ivy said simply. Medication when needed. Support systems. Understanding that some days are harder than others. Giving myself permission to struggle without judging myself for it. And showing up anyway, even when showing up is the hardest thing I've ever done. For the next hour, Ivy walked them through the basics. The neurological basis of PTSD. How trauma affects the brain. Why certain triggers cause specific responses. The difference between acute stress and chronic PTSD. How to recognize the signs in yourself and others. She used her own experiences as examples, laying bare her struggles in a way that was both vulnerable and educational. When the session ended, the four men sat quietly for a moment. Then Connor stood. "Ma'am, I want you to know, what you did today, sharing all of that with us, that took courage I don't have." "You do have it," Ivy corrected. "You just haven't needed it yet, but you will. Someday you'll need to be vulnerable, to ask for help, to admit you're struggling. And when that day comes, I hope you remember this conversation. I hope you remember that admitting you need help isn't failure, it's survival." The men filed out, subdued and thoughtful. Charlotte Warner appeared in the doorway as the last one left. "How are you holding up?" "I'm exhausted," Ivy admitted. "But okay, it's strange talking about this stuff. I've only ever discussed it with Dr. Chen. Putting it into a teaching context feels different." "Different good or different bad?" "Different necessary," Ivy said. "They need to hear it. And honestly, I think I needed to say it, to own it instead of hiding it." Over the following weeks, Ivy continued teaching. Each session delved deeper into the realities of combat stress. She brought in guest speakers, veterans with PTSD, therapists who specialized in trauma, family members of operators who'd struggled with reintegration. The four SEALs listened, asked questions, and slowly began to understand the complexity of what they dismissed as simple weakness. But something else happened too. Word spread. Other operators started asking if they could sit in on the sessions. Men and women who'd deployed, who'd seen combat, who'd struggled in silence because they thought admitting difficulty meant admitting failure. The circle of chairs grew larger. The conversations grew deeper. And Ivy found herself at the center of something unexpected. A community of warriors learning to acknowledge their wounds. One afternoon, after a particularly difficult session about moral injury and survivor's guilt, Matthew Sullivan pulled Ivy aside. "You know what you're doing, right?" "Teaching a class." "No, you're changing the culture. These operators, they're learning that it's okay to not be okay. That asking for help is a sign of strength, not weakness. That's revolutionary in a community that prides itself on being unbreakable." Ivy shook her head. "I'm just sharing my experience." "You're doing more than that. You're showing them what recovery looks like, what resilience actually means. You're Ghost, the legendary sniper, but you're also Ivy Sterling, the woman who survived and is rebuilding herself. Both of those identities matter. Both of those versions of you are teaching them something crucial." That night, Ivy sat in her apartment with Dr. Chen on a video call. "I've been thinking about something," Ivy said. "For months, I've been trying to figure out who I am now. Am I Ghost? Am I Ivy? Am I retired? Am I still an operator? And I think I've been asking the wrong question." "What's the right question?" Dr. Chen asked. "Why do I have to choose? Why can't I be all of it, Ghost and Ivy, retired and still contributing, wounded and capable, broken and whole, all at the same time?" Dr. Chen smiled. "That's growth, Ivy, real growth. You're integrating your experiences instead of compartmentalizing them. You're accepting that you're complex, that you contain multitudes. That's healing." Ivy looked at her hands. They were still trembling slightly. They probably always would. But for the first time, she saw the tremor not as a sign of weakness but as evidence of survival. Her body's way of saying, "We survived something terrible. We're still protecting ourselves. We're still here." "I think I'm ready," Ivy said quietly. "Ready for what?" "To accept the teaching position, full time. No more coffee service. No more hiding. I want to do this. Help other operators understand what I've learned. Build a program around resilience and recovery. Make this a permanent part of DEVGRU training. That's a big step. I know, but I think I'm ready. Or maybe I'm not ready, but I'm doing it anyway. Isn't that what resilience is? Showing up even when you're not sure you can handle it. The next morning, Ivy met with Commander Cross and Captain Mitchell. She accepted the teaching position officially. They discussed building out a comprehensive program, expanding beyond just the 4 SEALs to all operators going through the command, creating resources for families, establishing peer support networks. It was ambitious, it was needed, and Ivy was going to lead it. As she left Mitchell's office, she saw Connor, Mason, Ethan, and Bradley waiting in the hallway. They stood at attention when they saw her. "Ma'am," Connor said, "we heard you're taking the teaching position full-time. We wanted to say thank you for everything you've taught us, for not giving up on us even after we treated you so badly, for showing us what real strength looks like." "You're welcome," Ivy said simply. "There's something else," Bradley added. "We've been talking and we want to do more with this training. We want to help, be peer advocates, help other operators understand that struggling doesn't mean failing. Would that be okay?" Ivy felt something warm bloom in her chest. Hope maybe, or pride, or just the satisfaction of knowing that her pain had purpose. "I think that would be more than okay. I think that would be exactly what this program needs." As the men walked away, Ivy stood in the hallway for a moment, just breathing, just being. 6 months ago, she'd thought Ghost was dead, thought her service was over, thought being medically retired meant she had nothing left to offer. She'd been wrong, so completely wrong. Ghost hadn't died. Ghost had transformed, had evolved into something new, something that combined the skills of an elite operator with the wisdom of someone who'd been broken and rebuilt herself. And Ivy Sterling, the woman with trembling hands and scars she couldn't hide, was teaching warriors something more valuable than marksmanship or tactics. She was teaching them to be human, to be vulnerable, to be whole in their brokenness. What does it mean to finish a mission that never really ends? Ivy was about to find out. 3 weeks into her new teaching position, 3 weeks of building something meaningful from the pieces of her broken career, her phone buzzed with a message that changed everything. An unknown number, a priority alpha classification, and footage of a man who was supposed to be dead. Target Alpha, the ISIS commander she'd eliminated in Syria. The shot that earned her the Navy Cross and cost her everything. Except she hadn't eliminated him. He was alive, and according to the encrypted message, he knew exactly who she was and where to find her. Some ghosts don't stay buried, and some missions demand a final chapter, no matter how much you thought you were done writing them. Ivy sat in her apartment, staring at the grainy footage on her laptop. 3 days old. Northern Iraq or eastern Syria, the message said. Target Alpha emerging from a building, alive and moving, very much not dead. Her hands trembled as she paused the video, zoomed in on the face. It was him. No question. The same face she'd seen through her scope on August 12, 2023. The face she'd confirmed dead after Operation Silent Thunder. But he wasn't dead. The intelligence had been wrong. The confirmation had been wrong. The entire operation had been compromised. And now, 3 years later, he was back, building resources, planning revenge. And according to the digitally distorted voice on the phone, he knew she was alive. "You have 48 hours before he moves on the intelligence he's gathered," the voice had said. 48 hours to decide what you're going to do about it. Ivy closed the laptop, stood up, walked to her bedroom closet. Behind her civilian clothes, pushed far into the back, was the locked case she hadn't opened since her medical retirement. Inside were remnants of her operational days, dog tags, photos of her team, a challenge coin from her first successful mission, and the specialized encrypted phone used for contacting active duty JSOC personnel. She stared at it for a long moment. This was the line. On one side was the life she'd built over the past 6 months, teaching, healing, speaking, helping others navigate the path she'd walked. On the other side was Ghost, the operator who finished missions, who eliminated threats, who did what needed to be done. She could ignore the message, assume someone else would handle it, focus on her recovery. No one would blame her, she'd given enough. But 48 hours meant people might die. Operators, civilians, anyone Target Alpha decided to target in his quest for revenge. And she had the skills, she had the knowledge, she had the ability to stop him. Ivy picked up the operational phone with steady hands, powered it on, waited for it to boot up, stared at the contact list, names of people she'd operated with, people who'd know what to do, people who could help. Her fingers hovered over one name in particular, Commander Sarah Kane, her old team leader, the woman who'd pulled her out of Syria, the woman who'd held her hand during her medical discharge, the woman who'd understand exactly what this message meant and what Ivy was considering. She typed, "Priority contact needed, Ghost, urgent." The response came within 3 minutes. "Secure line, call now." Ivy dialed. Kane answered on the first ring. "Ghost, been a while." "Too long, ma'am." "What's the situation?" Ivy explained everything. The message, the footage, Target Alpha alive, the 48-hour timeline, the implicit threat. When she finished, Kane was silent for 5 full seconds. "Jesus Christ," Kane finally said. "Alpha survived, how?" "I don't know. Intel says the operation was compromised from the beginning. Someone fed us bad post-strike confirmation, made us think he was dead when he was just gone. And now he's back, hunting the operator who took his shot." "Hunting me," Ivy confirmed. Another pause. "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking I can't let him hurt anyone else. I'm thinking 48 hours isn't enough time for a full operational response. I'm thinking I'm the only person who has the specific knowledge of this target to move quickly enough to stop him. And I'm thinking I'm medically retired with PTSD and trembling hands and no business even considering this." "But you're considering it anyway." "Yes, ma'am." Kane sighed. "Ivy, listen to me carefully. You don't owe anyone this. You've given more than most operators give in a career. You've earned your retirement, your healing, your peace. If you walk away from this, no one who matters will think less of you." "But people might die." "People die every day. That's not your responsibility anymore." "Isn't it?" Ivy asked quietly. "I took the shot. I thought I finished it. If I didn't, if he's alive because I didn't verify, because the mission was compromised and I didn't catch it, then isn't this my responsibility to finish?" "That's guilt talking, not logic." "Maybe, but it's also truth. I have the skills, I have the knowledge, I have the ability to stop this. And if I don't and he kills someone, I'll carry that for the rest of my life." Kane was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was different, harder, the voice of a commander making calculations. "If you do this, it can't be official. You're retired. The Navy won't authorize it. This would be completely off book." "I understand." "You'd have no support, no backup, no extraction plan. You'd be going in alone." "I've operated alone before." "Not with PTSD. Not with physical limitations. Not after 6 months away from operational tempo. Ivy, this isn't 3 years ago. You're not the same operator you were." "I know, but I'm still Ghost, and Ghost finishes what she starts." Another long silence. Then Kane said, "Give me 3 hours. I'll make some calls, see what resources I can scrape together without raising flags. But Ivy, if you do this, you need to be certain, because there's no coming back from it. You go operational again, even for one mission, and everything you've built these past 6 months could come apart. Your teaching position, your healing, your stability, all of it." "I know. Are you willing to risk that?" Ivy looked at her reflection in the bedroom mirror, saw both versions of herself. Ivy, the civilian, Ghost, the operator, both real, both necessary, both part of who she was. "Yes," she said quietly, "I'm willing." The call ended. Ivy sat on her bed, phone still in her hand. What had she just agreed to? What was she risking? 3 weeks ago, she'd accepted a teaching position, started building a new life, started healing, started helping others heal. And now she was considering throwing all of that away to chase a ghost from her past. Except it wasn't just her past. Target Alpha was an active threat, a killer responsible for hundreds of deaths. If he was alive, if he was planning something, then stopping him wasn't about revenge or redemption or finishing old business. It was about preventing future harm. It was about using her skills for the purpose they'd been developed. Protection, defense, elimination of threats. Her phone buzzed. A message from Kane. Package incoming, review and confirm, 400 hours, decision time. Ivy spent the next several hours preparing. Not physically. Not yet. Mentally. She called Dr. Chen, told her everything. I need you to tell me if I'm making this decision from a healthy place or if this is PTSD driving me toward danger. Dr. Chen was quiet for a long moment. Honestly, Ivy, I think it's both. Part of you is being driven by guilt, by unfinished business, by the need to prove you're still capable. But part of you is making a legitimate assessment of a real threat and your unique ability to address it. The question isn't whether your motivations are pure. They never are. The question is whether you can do this without destroying yourself in the process. I don't know. Then don't decide yet. Wait for Kane's information. See what the actual situation is. Make the decision with full knowledge, not from fear or obligation. At 400 hours, Ivy's laptop received an encrypted file. She opened it. Mission brief, target location, updated intelligence, resources available, timeline. And at the bottom, a note from Kane. This is what I could put together. It's not much, but it's something. Your call. Ivy read through the brief 3 times. Target Alpha was in a compound in northern Syria, heavily guarded, well supplied, planning something big according to intercepted communications. And yes, he'd been asking about Ghost, about the female operator who'd taken the shot. He knew her call sign, knew she was alive, knew she was in Virginia. The threat was real, immediate, and if Ivy didn't act, someone else would have to. But someone else wouldn't have her knowledge of the target, her understanding of his patterns, her specific skill set. It would take weeks to brief another operator, plan an operation, get approval through channels. By then, whatever Alpha was planning would be in motion. Ivy stood up, walked to her closet, pulled out the case with her gear, opened it. Her rifle lay there, familiar and foreign at the same time. She picked it up, brought it to her shoulder, sighted through the scope at an imaginary target across the room. Her hands trembled, the crosshairs danced, but after a few seconds she found her rhythm, found the space between tremors where everything aligned. She could still do this. She was different now, changed, wounded, but still capable, still Ghost. Her phone rang. Connor, at 4:30 in the morning, she answered, Sterling. Ma'am, I'm sorry to call so early, but I just got word that you're being recalled. Is that true? Ivy closed her eyes. Word traveled fast on base. I'm considering something. It's not official. Is it dangerous? Yes. Can we help? The offer surprised her, touched her. No, this is something I have to do alone. Ma'am, with respect, you've taught us that we don't have to do anything alone. That asking for help is strength. If you're going back out there, let us support you. Even if it's just, I don't know, being here when you get back, making sure you're okay. Ivy felt tears forming. She blinked them back. Thank you, Connor. That means more than you know, but this is my mission, my responsibility. Understood, but ma'am, come back. Whatever you're going to do, come back from it. We need you here. Your students need you. Hell, I need you. You're teaching me things I should have learned years ago. Don't take that away. The call ended. Ivy sat in the darkness of her apartment, the rifle across her lap, tears streaming down her face. She'd thought coming back meant choosing between Ivy and Ghost, between teaching and operating, between healing and fighting. But maybe it wasn't a choice. Maybe it was integration. Maybe she could be both. Do both. Carry both lives simultaneously. At 600 hours, Ivy sent a message to Kane. I'm in. Send extraction coordinates. At 800 hours, she met with Commander Cross and Captain Mitchell, told them everything. I'm going operational for one mission, finishing something I started 3 years ago. It's off book, completely unsanctioned, but necessary. Mitchell leaned back in his chair. If I order you not to go, I'll respectfully decline to follow that order, sir. I'm retired. You don't have authority over me anymore. And if you don't come back, then my teaching materials are all documented. Someone else can continue the program, but I am coming back. This isn't a suicide mission. It's a completion. Cross studied her carefully. You understand the risks? Yes, ma'am. PTSD, episodes in a combat zone could get you killed. I've been managing my PTSD for 6 months. I know my triggers, I know my limitations, and I know how to work within them. Your hands shake. They've been shaking for months, hasn't stopped me yet. Cross smiled slightly. No, I suppose it hasn't, she stood. Officially, I can't sanction this. Officially, if anyone asks, you took personal leave and I have no knowledge of your location. Unofficially, she extended her hand. Finish it, Ghost, and come home. Ivy shook her hand, then Mitchell's. Then she walked out of the office and into the dawn light of a Virginia morning. She had 36 hours to prepare, to train, to remember what it felt like to be an operator instead of a teacher, to let Ghost surface fully for one final mission. She went to the range, fired 1,000 rounds. Her hands shook through every shot, but she adapted, found her rhythm, remembered the feel of the weapon, the discipline of breath control, the patience of waiting for the perfect moment. She went through tactical scenarios, close quarters, long range, movement under fire. Her body remembered even when her mind protested, muscle memory carrying her through movements she'd drilled thousands of times before. And that night she sat with Dr. Chen one final time. I'm going back to war, Ivy said, for one mission to finish what I started. How do you feel about that? Terrified, determined, certain I'm making the right choice and certain I'm making a terrible mistake, all at the same time. That's human, that's healthy. You're not charging in with false confidence. You're acknowledging the complexity. I'm scared I won't come back the same. That going operational again will undo all the healing I've done. Or, Dr. Chen said gently, it might prove to you that you can be both. That healing doesn't mean forgetting your past or abandoning your skills. That you can be Ghost when necessary and Ivy the rest of the time. That integration you've been working toward. This might be the final test. At 300 hours the next morning, Ivy boarded a transport. 12 hours later, she was in a safe house in southern Turkey. By nightfall, she'd crossed into Syria. And as the sun set over a landscape she'd hoped never to see again, Ivy Sterling transformed fully into Ghost. One final time, one final mission, one final shot. Target Alpha was in a compound 900 meters from her position, the same distance as the original shot. Poetic in a dark way, Ivy settled into position, set up her rifle, adjusted for wind, elevation, all the variables she'd calculated thousands of times before. Her hands trembled, she accepted it, worked with it, found the rhythm, and when Target Alpha appeared in her scope exactly where intelligence said he'd be, she took a breath, held it, and squeezed the trigger. The shot cracked out into the darkness. Through the scope she watched the impact, center mass, clean, confirmed. This time she stayed on target, watched him fall, watched for movement, confirmed the kill herself. No trusting secondary intelligence. No assumptions. Verification with her own eyes. Mission complete. Ghost extracted silently, crossed back into Turkey, flew home. 36 hours after leaving, she walked back onto the Virginia Beach compound. Connor was waiting. Welcome back, ma'am. Ivy smiled. Thank you. How are you? Tired, relieved. ready to get back to teaching. Your students are waiting. Ivy walked into the briefing room. Her students stood when she entered. Not just Connor, Mason, Ethan, and Bradley anymore. 15 operators now. Men and women learning that strength comes in many forms. "Sorry I'm late," Ivy said. "Had something I needed to finish." She didn't tell them where she'd been, what she'd done. That ghost had operated one final time. That she'd finished the mission that had broken her and proved to herself that being wounded didn't mean being useless. They didn't need to know the details. They just needed to see her standing there, still teaching, still healing, still both. Later that night, Ivy sat in her apartment. Her hands trembled. They probably always would. But she'd made peace with that. The tremor was evidence of survival, proof that she'd been through hell and was still standing. Battle honors in their own right. She looked at her reflection one final time, saw both versions of herself. Ivy Sterling, teacher, advocate, survivor. Ghost, operator, warrior, protector, both real, both necessary, both part of her story. Some missions never end, she thought. They just evolve. They transform. They become something bigger than a single operation or a single moment. They become a lifetime, a purpose, a way of turning pain into meaning, of transforming broken pieces into something beautiful, of showing others that being wounded doesn't disqualify you from being whole. And sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts, shows up, finishes the mission, carries on, survives, and teaches others to do the same.